Hello, everyone. Hello, Colton. Hello, Urza. This is going to be so much fun because we are going to be talking about Elric of Melniboné. Oh, God.
Melniboné.
There you go. That's it.
I'm going to set up a tally for how many ways it's pronounced in this stream.
I know, so many ways.
Not this entire thing, just the first book in this bind up, which I think is the most recent. Like, is it the authorized way or something? I don't know. Either way, we're going
this
through
one came out like last year.
Oh, okay. There you go. So yeah, we're going through this bind up. So we're doing the first book here. And before we get into it, PSA, I have COVID, so if I go on mute and or start hacking, you know why. But I'm gonna let all these lovely folks introduce themselves. Want to do like round robin or whatever?
I guess we could start with me in this order. All right. Hi, I'm Joanna from the channel Joanna, and I'm super excited to be here. I did read the first 3 in this bind up. It was a different edition back when I was a teenager, and I'm super excited to be here and discuss it again. It was fun to read this book again. I had forgotten so much, and thanks for having me.
Hi, I am Andrew. I'm a professional weirdo who does booktube videos twice a week, and I have read the first 2 in this current bind up because I couldn't wait.
I'm impressed that you've only read 2. Like, if you had come and said, I've now read every Elric book in existence, and that was my last month's wrap up, I would have believed you.
Probably.
I'm Sarah. Hello. This is also my first time reading, and I took off my dust jacket, which is unpopular in this group of people because I have learned now that Joanna and Evie are heathens and they read their books with the dust jackets on.
No,
you changed, right?
Yeah, I do read mine with mine off, but I did put it back on for the live show. So
I did the audio.
I'm Liam. I do videos on Liam's Lyceum. I read it over a year ago, slightly, but I just finished actually Stormbringer a few months ago, so I'm a little ahead. But and I have the old dog copies, so
that's amazing. That is
you collect all those cool antique versions.
Yeah, Liam is the resident expert here, so he's gonna be like, "You're wrong." With everything.
I don't know about expert, but
well, I know obviously Liam, you've done a bunch of videos about Elric and all that, and I know Joanna, you've read Epic Pooh.
Mm-hmm. I read.
And then Sarah, you read some stuff by Michael Moorcock. So
I've read the nonfiction collection, Wizardry and Wild Romance, and Epic Pooh is one of the essays in that binder.
Oh, okay.
Is it actually called Epic Pooh? Like Pooh Bear?
Like Pooh Bear.
Yeah. He's basically mocking Lord of the Rings as being epic Winnie the Pooh. And so he's doing it in a very pejorative way, even though a lot of people I know, adults included, love Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, he was being humorous there, darkly humorous.
Well, I know he's supposed to be the anti-Tolkien, but I mean, frankly, I still enjoyed it because it kind of has a lot in common with, modern dark fantasy. So that didn't bug me at all. They both have their place for me.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, having read neither Epic Pooh nor any other, obviously, nonfiction by Michael Moorcock, and only hearing from the grapevine that he hated Tolkien, was anti-Tolkien, I didn't know what I was going to get into going into this, and then I started reading it, and I'm like, I was surprised with 1, how easy it read, 2, how much I enjoyed it, and 3, it just gave me, like, I could feel its influence on, like, 80s fantasy movies, like Dragon Slayer and, oh crap, what was that movie? But yeah, just like the 80s fantasy movies, because it's like, it's a mustache twirling villain, and I really enjoyed it. So I was very, very pleased.
I was surprised by like how short it was because it's a fully fledged out story. Yeah. And I mean, my version is like 180 pages, if that. And I mean, I think it's a very clever use of time skips in the structure of the book to make you feel like you're getting a lot longer of a story than you're actually getting.
Yeah.
Did anyone read the introduction to this bind up? So Neil Gaiman wrote the introduction. And when I read Parable of the Sower, and who did the intro? N.K. Jemisin did the introduction. And so I skipped the introduction because I was like, sometimes these have spoilers because it's kind of like for fans of the series. So I skipped it. At the end of Parable of the Sower, I went back and read the introduction, which spoiled Parable of the Talents. And I was like, no, I even waited until the end to do this. So I have not read the introduction to this because I was like, how many of these will Neil Gaiman spoil for me?
He doesn't really spoil anything.
Oh,
excellent.
Okay, because I usually wait too, Sarah, for the same reason.
It's more of an outside narrative. It's like a fictionalized childhood recounting of him falling in love with the Elric stories and waiting for the next Elric to come out. And then there was this long dry spell between books 7 and 8 that was 15 years long. And it kind of recounts that, him hearing that there's a new Moorcock and it's actually Elric, and he's like running to the store to get it, and like what Elric meant to him. That's more of what it is. It's not actually talking about specific story elements in Elric.
I think it's interesting. I really like thinking about what my favorite authors like. So I enjoy knowing what the people whose books I enjoy. And especially for Neil Gaiman, because I find he's such a versatile author and he writes such a variety of styles. And reading only this first Elric book, I could say like this is a total Neil Gaiman book. Just reading, I was like, I can understand why he would like it and the things in this that he would enjoy. So I'm not surprised that he gets asked to write a lot of introductions because he's so well read and so well spoken. But I can see why he would enjoy this.
Well, something that since I've got Liam here, Liam, you like Sun Eater, right?
I do, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so because I did the audiobook, it's the same audio narrator for Sun Eater that is for Elric, but the cadence and everything also transfers rather well because it's that beautiful prose that Moorcock uses that kind of mirrors, or I guess kind of informed the Sun Eater, what Christopher Rocchio is doing. It was really, really interesting because I was able to just sink in and it felt very familiar.
Yeah, it's nice. I like that narrator, Sam Rukin, I think is his name.
Yeah,
he's a really good narrator. I listened to most of the Elric stories. I read this one without listening to it, but I listened to most of them. So.
I mean, as someone who's only read 1.5 of the Malazan books, I don't know. I mean, you've actually talked to Steven Erikson, Joanna, but I can see a little element of Michael Moorcock in Steven Erikson's work with like the philosophy and stuff like that. But I don't know.
Yeah. So I know I'm not so sure about Steven Erikson, but I know that Ian Esselmont has said that he was influenced by Elric for sure. So he's the other creator of the Malazan world. It's interesting because I know a lot of people consider this like the original quote unquote grim dark fantasy, whatever that means. I mean, it's definitely dark fantasy. Liam, would you say this falls into sword and sorcery?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah. I don't think I'd label it as grimdark. I think as far as influence goes, I don't think anyone can actually get away from being influenced by Moorcock. Whether it's direct or not, like whether they're like, yeah, I like Moorcock, I'm gonna, try to mimic him or whatever. But it's definitely it's considered at this point classic sword and sorcery. But it's actually kind of the reversal of the sword and sorcery tropes at the same time because he's anti-Conan. Elric is sickly, and weak compared to someone like Conan, who is not in any way, shape, or form. So
that's a really good point. Yeah,
I will say, like, I expected it to be darker. When everyone was just like, "Oh, Elric's so messed up," and like, he's this giant drug user. I was expecting Elric to be on drugs, and it was just like, well, no, he's actually just kind of taking potions and stuff like that in order to stay alive. But like the way that I had heard Elric talked about is like he's this albino dude who like steals people's souls, and he's constantly on drugs. And I was just like, no, this is beautifully written, and it's. People are exaggerating. Like don't get me wrong, the theme is there, but that's not what is actually being presented in the story. And it's also like he's a reluctant anti-hero. He just kind of wants to go out and explore things and gain knowledge, but then he's got to do anti-hero stuff. Like he's like, oh, I want to do the nice thing, and it'll cost you your soul.
It's an interesting reversal, and you talked about this, Andrew, on chat. I don't remember if it was in Discord or by voice, but you can see the influence on Drizzt as well, because you have this society that is really dark and expects darkness of you, and then this hero who's trying to rebel against this. Now, obviously, Elric and Drizzt go in very different directions, at least based on this first book, because Drizzt is trying to break free of his kind of oppressive society, whereas Elric is accepting his fate as someone who is part of this kind of monstrous society. But it's an interesting thing to look at. And do you think, because I thought this while I was reading the book too, the style this is written in is not my favorite. So I liked Elric, but more as like an academic exercise, as opposed to a book that I would pick up again and be like, I love this so much that I need to read it. But sometimes that really formal style can remove you from events. So like if you think about some of the things that happen, even in just this first book, there are monstrous things that happen. Like some of this stuff is awful, but it's written in a way that kind of removes you from what is happening. Whereas when you read something like Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin throws you into the grit of the world through the dialogue and the action and the way that it's written. You're really immersed in these like very immediate conversations and situations. Whereas with Elric, it does have that kind of romantic / poetic style that takes you back a couple of paces. So even though really dark stuff is happening, you don't experience it in the same way in Elric. And I don't know if that'll change because I only read this one. Liam can know in his mind, but not tell us yet.
So I have a question off that point, and I don't know how if this is a poor observation on my part or if it relates to what you're talking about, Sarah. Maybe this is just my lousy interpretation of it. But I remember when I read this as a teen and reading this now, I am having the same flashback experience where when I read this, I felt like maybe it's something about the way he writes, the approach he takes that gives that psychic distance. I'm not sure if that's what it is, or maybe just the way he brings up certain deities and monsters and things like that, that reminded me somehow of mythology. Like it somehow feels mythological for me, even though it's fantasy. And I can't really explain it any other way.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of it more as like, it almost feels like kind of like a satire, but not like in the haha sense of it. But I think that's more appropriate, Joanna, is like, it is this mythology because you really just see from the perspective of Elric, and you don't see like there are references to like the slaves and stuff like that, and but you don't explore that at all. It really just focuses on these larger than life people, or in this case, Elric really isn't a human. He's whatever he is. But yeah, no, I think that's a better way to describe it, is this like mythology. So
yeah, it's been a long time since I've read mythology or even the Odyssey, but I kind of feel like there's some kind of similar approach there. But Sarah said classical, so I thought, I wonder if there's some kind of connection to that.
I mean, and it does feel you have like it is a crumbling society, right? Like they are trying to recapture their glory day. So it does have that kind of doomed, advanced civilization feeling that you get in mythology too. So I can see why you would pick that up from that.
Yeah, kind of going on the doomed thing, like I can just picture like Venetians dancing as like the ballroom sinks into the sea. Like it's kind of that beautiful but like haunting sort of, they're just stuck in their glory days and they're trying to hold on, but I mean it's over. And Elric's really the only one who's acknowledging that fact, and he's just like, why do things the same way? He's like, I mean, technically I'm still doing the stuff my fathers did, but I'm coming at it differently, and they don't like that because any sort of deviation is obviously wrong, even though what they're currently doing isn't working. I love the kind of poetical kind of cadence and stuff that the story has that does add a couple layers of removal, because I mean there are times when Elric passes judgment and the stuff that he is ordering is just horrendous, but it just kind of slides right off because it's delivered in this kind of beautiful just flourish.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned before, Andrew, about the pacing, and I think that's what lends to it as well. Like, we're passing over a large amount of time, and even the time jumps, like, nothing seems wanting. Even though you recognize that there are the time jumps, there are these like horrific things that are being ordered, but it's very seamless the way that Michael Moorcock writes and tells his story. That it, like I said, it doesn't leave you wanting for anything. If that makes sense.
I mean, there's nothing I usually like Kingkiller Chronicles does a thing in the second book where we just skip over an epic adventure in like a paragraph. I constantly point to that as it annoys me, and I have nothing within this book, even though we go months, we just skip months, and it'll be like Elric studying sorcery. And you're like, I mean, I guess I could kind of want to read him studying sorcery or researching the library, but I don't need it. Like, I can already, the reader, basically Moorcock is saying, you know what this looks like. Like, you can visualize it yourself. I don't need to give that to you. And so we just fast forward. As basically he says, this is what Elric's doing, and then now we're at present day. And I like that.
It's pithy. That's why I like Sword and Sorcery, actually.
Yeah.
So I mean, a lot of people like epic fantasy today because it gives you more time in the world with the characters you love and the world you like. And back in the day, this stuff came out in magazines, and so they weren't going to do that. And so I mean, as far as some of your comments go, I think as far as like the Doom thing. This is totally a criticism of the British Empire, and Moorcock is in a way Elric, right? He's just like, yeah, you guys are. I mean, you're not the same anymore, right? And the Young Kingdoms is really the United States too, which is kind of odd to think about. But Moorcock moved to the U.S. Even, and so, and then that's like his poetic take on his doomed civilization, right? Because he is English. And he's a huge, I mean, he's a firecracker. He's making fun of everything too. So, but I mean, like, but as far as like the mythology stuff, I think that comes into a lot of the stuff actually comes in later in the series. I feel like it comes up more. And back to what Andrew said a few minutes ago about him being this terrible person, and like it gets way worse. So I mean, like,
brace yourself.
So yeah,
yay.
And that ties back to Epic Pooh too, which Joanna you read and Liam you read, right? Because his whole, it's not Tolkien he has an issue with. Like, he even says, I think in that essay, or maybe one of the other ones in Wizardry and Wild Romance, that there's nothing wrong with his writing. He was an accomplished linguist. Like, he says that he appreciates the world building that he did, but it's this idea that the kind of countryside English idyllic lifestyle is everything that you should be pursuing. Like, that idea that is the pinnacle of society is what he finds childish. Like, he thinks, or thought, I guess, that fantasy was this regression into the past, when fantasy could do more to think about, you know, the plight of humanity and what we owe the world and what the world owes us and all that kind of stuff. So I think it was less, his criticism was less about Tolkien as an author and more about what he symbolized in epic fantasy. Not that I think that not that I'm on his side, but it just is interesting that you say that that's the criticism of how the criticism of the British Empire ties into this kind of crumbling society. It's interesting. It's always fun to see how authors work their ideas into their fiction.
Well, wasn't Tolkien, and I could be completely off base, Liam's the authority on Tolkien. Wasn't Tolkien like writing Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit as like basically a way to deal with World War World War One.
Yeah, he said that he wasn't doing it that way, but critics were like, no, he actually wrote it as a response to, you know, dealing with World War One and that lost generation type thing. But
yeah, Tolkien's is like it's like a coping mechanism, and actually that's actually Moorcock's one of his things he just doesn't like in literature in general. A lot of fantasy, right, is escapism, and so it's a looking back, right? In Tolkien's case, it was his childhood. He liked his idyllic life, in Birmingham, or rather before he moved to the city of Birmingham, and the trauma of World War I affects that too, and it's kind of like coping with that sense. But then Moorcock is more of like a sci-fi writer. He's more of like, these are the issues of the day. He gets very political, and he's just like, I want contemporary issues in my fantasy. And so and he's still, in fact, I was watching an interview with him yesterday and he said the same thing, and the guy's, like 82 or something. And so it's just like, he's still like, I want contemporary issues in my stuff like that. So I don't read most of the fantasy, basically, is what he's saying.
That's
although I feel like there's a lot that's available to him now that could fill that want, if that is, if he cared to explore. And I don't know anything about what he reads now, but there's definitely more of that on the fantasy market than there used to be.
I was gonna say, there's definitely a lot of that. Not to say that there wasn't stuff at the time or even before Elric, but I imagine that he was a kind of a precursor of more modern, more forward thinking fantasy rather than regressive, I guess. I don't know what the word is, but yeah,
maybe nostalgic.
There you go.
So that's funny because I think that ties perfectly. I totally agree, Sarah. I think that was definitely the crux of his argument in Epic Pooh. I think also it's interesting with the whole. I know the label grimdark is kind of annoying for a lot of people these days, but I think that's the argument a lot of people have for why we want grimdark or why we want darker fantasy, is this idea not necessarily to glorify violence and darkness because it's entertaining for its entertainment factor, or to be voyeuristic in a sense, but more just because that's the real world. That's what fantasy can do. That's the way that fantasy can be progressive, is to kind of deal with these real world issues and not sort of turn away and sort of fade to black in these war scenes and things like that. And so I kind of feel like that's sort of the idea that Moorcock is trying to turn fantasy in a different direction. And I guess I kind of see that sort of paralleling. I guess that might be why some people would think of him as being sort of the grimdark person. But at the same time, Conan was before Moorcock.
Yeah, no, Conan was like 50 years prior.
Yeah. And Conan definitely took a very critical eye at society in his stories. Yeah. And by the way, I think I don't know about the time jumps per se, but what I've read of Conan, if you like that sort of fast-paced storytelling in a way, Andrew, I think you'd really love Conan.
I've got the first two collections. I need to get the third, and then I'm pretty much just gonna binge it. I find I'm liking older style fantasy along with my new indie stuff as well. I've been collecting a lot of the older Stephen King, but a lot of David Gemmell as well. David Gemmell's from the same era as Moorcock, but Gemmell leans more into the heroic fantasy versus sword and sorcery, which they're just two different labels for something that are incredibly similar. Yeah, Liam's laughing at me.
No, it's true. No,
but no, it's just I picked up Elric, and I was expecting one thing, and then to have not only did it not meet my expectations, but then it also exceeded my expectations because, like I said, I was expecting some drug head who's just strung out and killing people for whatever. And instead I get this beautiful kind of flowing story that has these really dark elements that is delivered in such a way that you can read it without just stopping and going, that's horrific. But it is horrific, but you just continue reading because how can you not? And I just kind of love that stuff.
Both,
yes.
To answer that question.
Or is this comment both?
There you go. Matt just answered.
Same with Elric. There are books and there are comics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we talked about Moorcock and Elric in general, but I don't think we really talked about the actual story or the book.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know we talked about like how writing style and stuff like that, but what did you think about like Elric as he's presented in this first book, and like his relationship with, is it you? Oh gosh, I'm gonna mispronounce it. Yirkun? Is that it?
Sounds good to me.
There you go.
Andrew, do you remember from the audiobook? Was it?
What are we talking about here?
Was it Yirkun?
Cimmeril.
No,
And
her
her
brother.
brother.
And his cousin.
Why are
Cimmeril?
No, her brother. So Cimmeril and the villain, Antigonus.
I think that's Irkun.
Okay, all right. So I did pronounce it right. That's fine.
Yeah, Irkun. Because it's a double Y.
I should trust my gut then. Well, I mean, to answer my own question, like he felt like a little bit of a, not like a, like you could see his idealism, but it seemed very like in theory rather than in practice, and he didn't really think about his idealism through like how it would impact anyone around him other than himself, if that makes sense. But
well, I mean, I think that comes a lot from Elric's origins. You know, he's very much unwanted by his father. His father didn't want him. I believe Elric's mother died in childbirth because of him, correct? I've read like 3 stories with the story element, so I could be completely misremembering this.
maybe
very recently.
I don't recall.
But yeah, Elric was very much unwanted by his father, but he was the only heir who could step in. And so they followed tradition, and, you know, Elric became very strong in his sorcery, the strongest. And when it came to family, he didn't really feel the need to vilify his own family because he didn't feel threatened. He felt not only superior in his magic, but also in his intellect and secure in his position. Or actually, maybe not even secure in his position. I don't think he cared really all that much. I think he's very apathetic about life in general. Only when it came to Cimmeril could he be stirred. Yeah. And I think really all he wanted to do was be a regular guy and fall in love, but he was stuck on the throne, and he didn't see a way out until, you know, the end of the book.
Good old philosopher king.
Pretty much.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can tell me to stop talking whenever.
I guess I'll just add that one thing that I found really interesting about him early on, because I have it tabbed here, was how with Yirkun was kind of a jerk and constantly testing him and constantly a threat. And it seemed like he never, especially at the beginning, he was not really, he sort of seemed like he kind of allowed that. He sort of allowed room for that. And I put down that he doesn't seem to trust loyalty. He seems to allow some room for his followers to doubt him.
Well, it continues on to because at the end he one of the lines that I marked was, and upon these 3 lies was Elric's destiny to be built, for it is only about these things, it is only about things which concern us most profoundly that we lie clearly and with profound conviction. And one of the first lies that he tells is about Yirkun, by giving him the power of the throne and, you know, trusting that he will not usurp him because he is loyal to him now. And I'm like, this is going to end badly. Like, This is a bad idea, bad choice.
Well, I think Elric is a character, you know, constantly in denial. He's very apathetic about everything. He doesn't really care. Well, I can't tell you that because I've already read Fortress of the Pearl. So, but I think something that we do see here is, again, it's all about Cimmeril. Elric does not care for his own life. It's not something he's really concerned with. And so whenever Yirkun is acting up, he doesn't care. Basically, he'll unthrone me or he won't. If he succeeds, he succeeds.
I found that quote I was thinking of. It says here, perhaps their loyalty, she basically asks, it is your right to do what you think, for you are the emperor, and who are loyal to you think as I do. So like basically you're the emperor, we're loyal to you, we will do whatever you want us to do. And he says, perhaps their loyalty is misguided. Perhaps your coon is right, and I will betray that loyalty, bring doom to the Dragon Isle. And then he says, perhaps I should have died as I left my mother's womb. So you were right, Andrew. Then your coon would have become emperor. Has fate been thwarted? So he even questions whether your coon should have been emperor to begin with.
Yeah, he's very apathetic to everything, and I can almost say he's a depressive character, to where like he's constantly self-doubting and questioning his value and whether life's really worth it. But one thing Elric doesn't like is Elric doesn't like being screwed over, or if he could just kind of stick it to somebody, he gets great joy out of that.
Well, he doesn't go after Yukun in the oh gosh, what was that little place called where the god took him or whatever? That plane until Cimmeril was like, basically told him save my brother or something like that. I might be misremembering, but
well, no, he has to go after her because again, Cimmeril's all he cares for, and
right.
Cimmeril's now in a sleeping spell.
She's in the coma. He needs Yurkum to wake her up.
Yeah.
It was a specific spell that required his survival.
Oh yeah, that's right. Never mind. I'm misremembering. Just kidding. Carry on.
But I loved all of that stuff. I especially loved inclusions of demons and gods because it brings back what Joanna was saying earlier, that mythological feel. Yeah. The ship of land and sea, that was so cool.
Yeah.
I thought that was just dope.
Mm-hmm. That was awesome.
That is one thing that I had wished that we had more time with is that ship and just learning more about it and just more with that. I thought that was really cool.
I remember where I was when I was listening. I was cutting grass. And like I had to stop because like the land god was being a bit of a, I don't want to swear on Evie's channel.
I don't care. Go for it. D-bag.
He's a douche.
I don't want to swear. Douche.
That was really cute, Andrew.
Oh goodness.
I did introduce myself as a weirdo. But yeah, no, I had to stop and listen to that because like he's trying to be like, hey, he's like, we need to get across the land, and the god's just like, no, that's my ship. I don't care what my brother said. I love that whole section.
Yeah,
I loved it. It's like it's so perfect for people who do have issues with their memory, like that will say things and they're like, no, this is mine. Like it reminded me a lot of the Earth God just being like a toddler. Like I shared this, but now it's mine, and I never wanted to give it away. And
it reminded me, honestly, my dad has a terrible memory. And as a teenager, he'd like just come into my room and start screaming at me. He's like, I told you to clean this room. Why is this such a pigsty? I was just like, you never said anything to me. He's like, it was in my head. And it's just like, that doesn't translate. I'm not a mind reader.
Yeah.
So one thing about Elric's character too, I'm just looking back at my tabs and it's interesting what you were saying about him being an apathetic character, but also I think something that is brought up a couple of times I've noticed in the story were some things about his ancestors and where how his lineage has some connection to who he is as a person. And so I wondered if anybody picked up on that.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say. So actually, one of the portions, another portion that I marked is he's talking about. I'm trying to remember the context for this, but the specific passage that I marked was, "It is what my father would have done. It is what your coon would have done had our positions been reversed. I but follow the traditions. I no longer pretend that I am my own man. Here I shall stay until I die, trapped upon the ruby throne, serving the ruby throne as Valharic claimed to serve it. And then he goes on to say, let me be destroyed. Let me merely become an unthinking extension of my ancestors, the puppet of ghosts and memories, dancing to strings which extend back through time for 10,000 years. And I mean, he's kind of given up on like, okay, fine, I'll just do whatever. I'll continue the track that we're on and not try and change anything.
Like yeah, I feel like that comes up sometimes in different stories too. That idea or concept that the more power you have or higher leadership you have, or actually the higher your leadership role is, the less actual free will you have.
Yeah.
And it sort of seems to come up in his game, maybe because he's so well learned and he does read a lot. He's sort of aware of that.
Well,
yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, I'm like, one thing that I was struck by when I first started was like he's learning and he's being a philosopher, but the way that it's portrayed, it's like this brand new thing. Like no one's ever thought of philosophy and thinking of others. So I was like, does this society not like understand like, you know, Plato-esque type or Aristotelian, whatever, type things? Like, what's going on here?
Well, I mean, they're a pretty id-driven society. It's like, I want to eat this, kill this, do this, and I'm going to do it, and I'm the emperor, so you need to cheer for me. And really, like, any indecisive, like the things that we think of as strong leadership characteristics, like foresight and temperance and hesitation before action, are all weaknesses in this Melnibonéan society. They are like a very egocentric, they're just going to do it. And they like that. They celebrate that. Like it is your ability to never doubt yourself that is the highest symbol of power for them. And that's what they want from Elric. And that's the part of this book that I like the most, is that like that is where the tropes get subverted. Like Elric, his rebelling against his society when his society is actually evil, and then following this path where he needs to circle around and become a tyrant himself is so good. That is, it's really interesting.
Well, and I think Melniboné, at least the people, it's a riff on elves. It is really what it is. It's Moorcock making fun of elves and the fact that they're so long lived and their societies become stagnant. Like in Lord of the Rings, the elves haven't changed really in 3,000 years. They just don't trust people anymore. Ever since alliances broke down, they just all become secular and they stay the way they are. And I think that's what Moorcock's poking fun at. And I think once Yirkun finally takes a stab at Elric and almost succeeds, we once again get Elric falling into his apathy and his depression, where he feels trapped on his throne. He sees no way out, and so he says, "Screw it! I'll just continue the tradition. I'll keep driving us into oblivion. Why not?"
Yeah, and it's very Lord of the Flies, right? Like if you live long enough, what is going to bring you happiness? Like misery, torture, and pain. Which is a really bleak way of looking at the world, but it works for the story.
Excuse me.
Maybe that is what would happen. I don't know.
So in other words, Yirkun would probably be the more Melnibonéan type of emperor. Yes. He'd be the more ideal emperor for this type of.
And that he straight up tells Elric to his face. He's just like, I would be a better emperor to our people than you are. And that is true if they want to continue on the same path that's been going on. But if Elric had stayed, things might have gone better for Melniboné, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because it's like Elric never seems to demand loyalty. He never seems to, he's not that typical type of tyrant. And that seems to draw more loyalty to him, I think. There's some characters, I guess there are some characters that are more loyal to Yirkun. But I feel like he sort of seems like he always, I don't know, the way that Moorcock wrote Elric, for me as a reader, I feel like Elric just seems so much more cool than Yirkun, even though I know, I mean, there are definitely critical ways of looking at Elric.
I think we're going to see Elric become like a reluctant agent of just straight up chaos. As Liam's like,
It's so hard to just sit there.
You have a terrible poker face, sir.
It's up and down. No, I think it's funny actually that what John was saying earlier about Yerkun being mean and like criticizing Elric, but and this is me being consciously not talking about the next books, but Yerkun is right. I mean, like Elric sucks as an emperor. I mean, to be completely honest, like he's like he's really the only Melniboné besides what's his name, Ivan Far or whatever, that has a conscience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that conscience ruins him, right? Because all he wants is, I mean, yeah, he's apathetic towards everyone besides Silmaril, but all he wants to do is what he wants to do. And that's the sword and sorcery thing coming on in here. Like, even though, right, he could have started this story and be like, yeah, he's an emperor of this, great empire that's lasted, thousands of years, right? It could have been turned into epic fantasy really quickly, but instead it's like Elric, it's just about him. Okay. That the story is about Elric. Okay. And it's very character focused, which is very typical of the genre. And it gets Elric in a few different situations, but
yeah, I don't think Elric would be a good leader, but I think he would at least jolt Melniboné out of their rut, because they haven't been a power in 500 years,
something like that. I can't remember.
Despite the fact that he sits on a giant ruby throne. I don't know.
To shift gears, the sword, Stormbringer. I loved that.
Oh, me too. Can we also talk about the pulsing cavern?
Yes.
Because it was really gross.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. My mind just went to some dirty places while I was reading that.
Oh, no. I imagined it as like a giant sphincter. So
I didn't mention I was changing a diaper before we went live, right?
I think that was very intentional. I mean, I can't see how it wasn't.
But then the way that he got out of it, like got them all out, I think that was pretty cool.
I'm not touching the pulsing.
Do you have any commentary about the pulsing sphincter?
No, we're not.
Yeah.
You guys can have fun with that.
Yeah.
I'll sit here and make faces.
I was creeped out. Through that whole entire scene. I don't know. There's something I thought it was interesting.
Well, I mean, it reminded me of like, an 80s fantasy film where this is like the final level, and there's always those scenes of like you finally gotten to your goal, but then literally he's standing right in front of the sword, and it's like, all right, well, here we go.
I feel like there's an 80s video game, one of the really famous ones, and I can't.
Gauntlet?
What is it?
Gauntlet.
No, it's another one. But I feel like I played a video game in the 80s on Nintendo that had kind of like a sort of atmosphere like that, like a pulsing.
Is it Zelda?
And it what?
Would it be Zelda?
Not Zelda, no. It was. I'll figure it out, man. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting. But anyway,
Ganondorf is always where you don't want him to be.
Yeah, I never really got into Zelda, honestly. Kind of a big fault on my part, but
there's still time.
Anyway, but yeah, the whole duel with a Stormbringer and what's the other? Mournblade. Thank you. Let's talk about that, because that was cool.
So I just loved the blade is a living thing, and it wants to have blood, and it wants to make Elric kill things to feed. And I love how this dynamic of Elric is able to master the blade and make him do what the blade wants, rather than make have the blade make Elric do what the blade wants, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the blade is very much a corrupting influence. It wants to consume the soul and gain power, and it promises vitality and freedom from his drugs and potions. All he's got to do is go on a few killing sprees.
As one should.
As one should, exactly. But I liked the whole where he tried to shoot him with the arrow and it just went nowhere. And he's just like, you should probably go. He's like, all right, yeah, peace, bye. Okay, I'll go.
You're correct.
I mean, regarding Colton's comment for the cheesy dialogue, I mean, not to say that the entire book was full of cheesy dialogue, but it made sense. Like, it was all pretty melodramatic, I think, throughout it. So it just made sense for the project of the book, I guess.
It felt consistent to that world. Yeah.
And intentional.
Yeah. And I always think of just how young Moorcock was when he was writing this stuff. He was like 22 when he first wrote Elric.
Wow.
Really?
So he was very young. Yeah.
Was he 22?
Yeah, when the Dreaming City came out in the
William
60s.
Andrew.
So
Say what?
when the Dreaming City came out, sorry, yeah, in the 60s he was about 22, I think.
This is from the 60s.
I was just saying, Andrew, don't question Liam. He is the resident expert. So
I didn't realize it was from the 60s.
Mm-hmm. It was put into this bind up as Elric and Melniboné in the early 70s. So.
Oh, okay. There's the
60s versions which no one reads because they got heavily reworked. Stormbringer, the last book, was the first one written. So once you read Stormbringer, you'll understand how the kind of the path that Elric is starting on when he starts here.
Which is why I think, if I recall correctly, like these bind-ups that this one and then the other ones that are coming out or are out or something like that are like the Moorcock approved ones. Like this is the way it should have been read or something like that.
Yeah, it's in chronological order instead of publication.
Right. Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, a new one just came out.
And a new one comes out in December.
Seriously?
Yeah, there's an actual new one.
Yeah, two more come out. Stormbringer just came out, and then White Wolf, and then.
So wait, Stormbringer that was written in the 60s just came out?
No, the bind up.
Oh, the bind up. I was so confused.
Yeah.
I was just like, he sat on that for a long time.
No, yeah, he's got like an original. The DAW were like the original like essential ones, and that has 6 books. Starts with this one, ends with Stormbringer. And then he added 2 more, Fortress of the Pearl and Revenge of the Rose. And those weren't included in a lot of the bind-ups. And there's a sequel series as well called the Dream Quest Trilogy, which I think is getting a bind-up. And then the new book that comes out in December is 2 stories that were originally published. One's actually in here, which has a story by Stephen Erickson too. And then a completely original new one that hasn't been published yet.
So there's 10?
There will be 9 if you don't count the Dream Quest trilogy.
Why
so we have a lot of live shows.
I don't know.
So Liam, as someone who reads like a ton of sword and sorcery, where does Elric rank for you? Like how does this fit into your enjoyment of that subgenre?
Well, if you look at like the people that are generally considered the 3 masters of sword and sorcery, I would rank him as the 3rd. I would put my enjoyment of Fritz Leiber as number 1, and then probably Robert E. Howard, who wrote Conan and stuff, at number 2. It's still really good. I think his style is more for philosophical meandering and thoughtfulness, and it's really negative and tragic. If you read his stuff, he's very nihilistic. Just about everything he writes. I mean, like it's very much the critique, especially on capitalism. His stuff is very influential on like cyberpunk as genre. And so that's cool. I think it helps to listen to it though, just personally. But yeah, I always tout Fritz Leiber, who actually is the guy who coined the term sword and sorcery. He's buddies with Moorcock. He died about 30 years ago, but he is probably my favorite sword and sorcery author.
Nice.
Note to self.
Yeah, I know. You're gonna have to let us know where to start with Fritz Leiber.
Liam's been talking about Fritz Leiber, or I've always said Leiber. You say Leiber.
He said Leiber, so
yeah. So since like you first hopped in the Discord.
Yes, Leiber is great. He's actually one of the few guys that is he's actually the only guy that is considered a World Fantasy Award Grandmaster of Sci-Fi and Grandmaster of Horror. So he is like, he won like 8 Hugos, several Nebulas. The guy is like crazy and very underread, underappreciated these days. Moorcock talks about him still. So I mean, like, they were good buddies. He'll recommend him still. So he'll also recommend Barrington Bailey, who is also very underread, but he didn't write Sword and Sorcery. So
yes, the Mouser books are on his like top 100 fantasy list.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote with whoever else. I don't remember who put that together with him, but
yeah, Harry Fisher.
There we go.
You've just got all this information right on the top of your head, don't you?
Some of you.
Have you read any of other Moorcock works, Liam?
No, I haven't actually. I have a couple. I have the Final Program, which is a new wave sci-fi. I hear it's really trippy. I have the UK version because the US version was had stuff cut from it. And then I have his Dancers at the End of Time, which is a very nihilistic Dying Earth trilogy. So I have not read those yet.
Just to make sure, you said Dying Earth, not Diner trilogy. Right?
Dying Earth, yes. It's a Dying Earth subgenre.
My ears are not working, apparently, so we're good. Cool.
Can we talk about the siege on the city, like at the end of the book? Because I loved that scene.
With the giant mirror, that was
a giant mirror, but the way Elric gets around it was so good. I love, like, because you think he's just like, yeah, get all the retirees, like, just I'm gonna take those guys, and like the whole time that they're traveling, you're just like, but why is he taking these guys? And then like it isn't until the actual charge that the reveal happens, and I was just like,
yeah,
that was so good, because I couldn't figure it out. And usually I'm very good at figuring stuff out, and I did not see that coming.
It's kind of screwed up, though.
It is messed up.
Man.
It's one of those darker themes that, you know.
So I guess the question is were they already blind when they were retired, or did he blind them?
I think they were already blind.
My gosh, that's even worse, Evie.
Yeah. No, I think they were already blind. I think there was something about them already.
Yeah, they had been injured in battle, or had been, you know, just through age and things of that nature, lost their vision. And it was amazing that, like, he has these people guiding them through the city. I love that whole thing. And then, like, I loved how the dude got his just desserts at the end, because he was just like, yeah, I need you to go shatter the mirror. All right, and then I'll give you, and then you can just go off and be your thing, knowing that he's just gonna fall. I actually belly laughed.
I like that you like that so much.
He was just so spineless. It's always when you see somebody who you can't stand get their just desserts, and it's tragic that somebody's died, but there's that little chuckle.
I felt really conflicted about it in a way, though, because I'm like, these are people who served him, and, you know, this is how they're, I don't know. There was something kind of messed up about it. It's like, let's take all the disabled veterans and throw them, you know, to the fire, so to speak, in a way. And
I feel like that might be a phrase that you bring back for some of these live shows, Joanna. Kind of messed up about it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, probably.
Well, you know, I guess it's a means to an end. So
yeah, it's a utilitarian kind of idea there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and were they like serving a function in the society of Melniboné? Like, I'm trying to think of, like, was there a cultural reason that they agreed to do it? Was it just because he was emperor, or because they were tired of not being valued for their previous service? I can't remember.
Well, I don't think they spelled it out or like put it on the page, but I read it more as this idea of loyalty, that even though they were retired, they're still loyal to Elric and to the Ruby Throne. And
so it's like loyalty without question.
Yeah. They're
Fair
called
enough.
back into service, and all right, cool.
And like Evie said, that was a total 80s fantasy movie moment. So you have this like cackling villain up in the top being like, ha ha ha, my plan is all gonna, like, no, we have a blind legion. Ha! It was, yeah, it was good.
It was really wild for sure. Yeah.
Irkun is very much just, I'm always going to come out on top. Curses! I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you pesky kids.
Right? That is very much the vibe that it gives.
And you're Elric?
I'd love to talk, if we have a moment, about Cimmeril. Cimmeril? Yeah.
Cimmeril.
Yeah. Any thoughts about her? I'll just say really quickly, I thought the scene where they go off together and have their little lovemaking thing in the cave or whatever, and then they're writing back and he's starting to have a withdrawal from the drug, and he starts kind of looking different and kind of seeming like has this wild grin. I don't know. I try to put myself in her perspective. I probably did that too when I was young, because I don't know that. Anyway, I just thought that was really
you did what, Joanna?
Try to put myself in because I know that when I was a teenager, it's kind of off topic. I think I always had, one of the reasons I really kind of struggled with getting into fantasy was that I felt like I didn't really see myself in a lot of the fantasy I was picking up because it was so male perspective driven. So I think anytime I saw a female character in fantasy books at the time, I just latched onto her. So anyway, that's what I meant by that. But yeah, so putting myself in her perspective and seeing Elric is sort of this, I don't know, there's something that's kind of glamorous about this strange albino sorcerer kind of type. And then when he gets that withdrawal from the drugs and he starts getting all eerie and twisted looking, and I don't know, there was something that just I thought was really creepy about that. Am I missing?
I just remember them trying to race back in time.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought there was a part where she like has this wild smile and she gets kind of scared. Like, yeah.
I remember that happening.
I totally believe you. I just don't remember it.
Well, I think it hit me because I'm like, they just had this lovemaking night, and to be totally in love with this person and to be coming back from this night of lovemaking, and then to see him as almost transform into this creepy otherworldly creature when he doesn't have his drugs. Like, I don't know. It just, it kind of creeped me out.
Yeah.
From her perspective.
Yeah, it says that she knew profoundly that their morning's ride was the last moment of peace the two of them would ever experience again. The storm was a sign from the gods themselves, a warning of storms to come. And like, I mean, I did like that, but more than anything, like, Cimmeril for me seems the most like real character out of all of them. She's not like, you know, the mustache twirling villain, or, you know, this Elric, you know, kind of apathetic character. She has wisdom in her, and because she's the damsel in distress, like, she has a role to fill in that space. But like in that scene where they like ride off together, she says, "Fate is never thwarted. What has happened because fate willed it thus. If indeed there is such a thing as fate, and if men's actions are not merely a response to other men's actions." And I'm like, listen to her. Please listen to her. Can she be the emperor, please?
I know.
Well, that saying is like extreme foreshadowing. I'm sorry, yes. Like that is like, and that is something that Elric fights against the entire series. But fate is like one of the strongest. That's actually probably one of the themes, probably to all Elric series as a whole, is fate. And somewhere else seems to be tuned in while Elric is not, at least initially. So
Well, she's also like one of the only female perspectives that we get in the entire story, from a commoner all the way up to nobility.
She is the only.
Yeah, she is the only female perspective in this book.
She feels, like you said, very real, but also because of the way that society and structure is set up, she has no power to gain really, other than becoming the queen or becoming Elric's bride. And so,
or also her brother's bride, which was also
I wasn't gonna go there. It's creepy. Anyway, nobles are weird. It seems very much that she got to be fleshed out and be more realistic, because she's got really no stake in the other than her own survival and safety, having to marry her brother. She's very much rooting for Elric, and so therefore feels more real to me. I don't know where I was going to go. I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole now, and I lost my original train of thought. But I liked the way she was portrayed, because she has, she's very loyal, and not because he's the emperor, but because they have an actual relationship, and she's willing to fight for that.
Yeah, and to respond to Raph, in that first scene, she's incapable of understanding Elric. The ride back is a reflection of that inability. I could definitely see that. She's trying to understand him, and then when she sees his face, she realizes, yeah, she's never going to be able to understand him, because he's not only so different, but also he's changed. He's just maniacal in a way.
Yeah, it's like the complete ostracizing of Elric from the Melniboné in society if he can't even be understood or connect with someone else.
It was interesting the way that they parted ways at the end too.
And yeah, she basically begs him to stay, and he's just like, nah.
But I also like that she didn't go with him too. He then begged her to go with him. And she said, no.
She's still Melnibonéan, so she still wants to be a part of her society, and Elric doesn't.
And he asked her to rule too in his place. Isn't that right?
I think he thought about it, but it was tossed out because it wouldn't be accepted or something.
Yeah, no, he
or she rejects it. One of the two.
I thought she rejected it.
He gives it to Yukirun, and she's like, "Why, you idiot?" Yeah. Basically, she's like, "No, he will abuse any power," and he says, "Not now." And it is just. He's the only one who wanted to be emperor, and now he can rule as emperor for a year in my stead. If he rules well, I may consider abdicating in his favor. If he rules badly, it will prove once and for all that his ambitions were misguided. To which Cymberl says, "I love you, but you are a fool, a criminal if you trust Yukirun again." I'm like, yes!
Also going to be, I think, a theme throughout these live chats. We love you, Elric, but you're a fool.
Yeah.
What are you doing? I don't know. The two major things at the end of book 1, so leaving Yukirun in charge and then also feeling like he has mastery over the sword, I feel like are two things that are going to prove to be very foolish on his part. I do not believe for a second that he has any mastery over that sword. I could be wrong. I guess we'll find out in the coming books, but I don't get the sense that that's the end of its plea for blood or whatever it is that it wants from him.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, with that quote that you read earlier, Evie, of when they're parting way or when they're going back and there's a storm coming, and it seems like storm coming, it feels like kind of foreshadowing with that. And it seems like there's a lot, like Liam was saying about destiny, and there was that whole monologue in the pulsing cavern about, I forgot who it was who was talking to him and telling him, your destiny are these rune swords. Mm-hmm. And he basically, that he needs to have the courage that his ancestors don't have. So bringing that lineage thing back. And he basically says, he has to face his destiny, meaning he has to face Stormbringer. And it's almost like him trying to take power over Stormbringer and thinking he has power of it is sort of almost like a symbol of him trying to take power over his fate or destiny. I don't know. That's kind of how I'm seeing it in my head, but I'm not sure if that's accurate.
Keeping in mind that this entire scenario has been set up by a demon. that he now owes this big favor to.
Oh, that's true.
Maybe not the most.
Ariak.
There we go.
Thank you, Elric. That's right.
I was trying to. I was sitting here the last 5 minutes going, "What was that demon's name?" No, it was an awesome first book. I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely loved. I think I did the same thing to Fortress of the Pearl, but we're not here to talk about that. It was just a really enjoyable story to me.
Yeah, I feel like I need to reread it now. Honestly, like you all have more fresh like thoughts about the story, and I was like, wow, this is actually a really good first volume. Like, like thinking about how the rest of the series goes and everything. So, because I remember thinking this was okay actually when I read it. I liked it, but I wasn't like, oh, this was awesome or amazing. But now, hearing you guys talk about it, thinking about it more, I was like, oh, that's actually pretty good.
Oh, I feel so validated that Raph put that comment, by the way, because like that kind of speaks to that. And I was saying earlier, Raph, that I feel like, to me, I don't know why, but this story reads to me like Greek mythology. There's something Greek mythological about it. And maybe it's also that fate theme too, and the hubris.
Also the demons and
yeah, just the way, I don't know, the way it's set up. And I think Sarah brought that up too really well about the kind of form, the way he writes.
I liked this one. It's always more fun discussing. I always feel like I like them more when I talk to somebody about them anyway, in the same vein as you, Liam. It's always fun to talk about them with other people. I gave it 3 stars. I thought that it was good. I liked it, as I said, like an exercise in understanding where many of these influences came from, but it is not my favorite kind of story. Like that feeling removed from the text is not something that I like. I like immersion. Which is just a personal preference. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just not the style that I enjoy the most. So I thought that it was good, but I'm really excited to read the next one and talk about it because it's always more fun to do this.
Yeah, for me, it's not psychologically immersive in that sense. For me, it was actually very atmospheric. And so for me, I did feel immersed more in the atmosphere of it than the psychology of it. But at the same time, talking about it, there's obviously a lot to unpack with the psychology of it too, I think.
Yeah, I am very glad we got to the hour mark. Admittedly, we spent like the first half just talking about Michael Moorcock and like in general, but still, I was like, this is like 160 pages. Are we going to get like even 30 minutes out of this?
Oh, yeah.
But I wound up giving it 4.5 stars. I was very surprised with how much I liked it. So
engaging with fantasy as a genre, not just writing within it. I absolutely agree. And that is how I enjoyed it. So I liked this as a critique of fantasy rather than as a fantasy story that I'm going to be like, oh, I need more. It's more of an intellectual exercise, I guess. Like not in a,
I can agree with that.
Warning, Andrew, not in a douchey kind of way, but in a like,
you gotta warn me before you use that kind of language. Jesus.
in a fun way.
But I can kind of agree with you. I still gave it 5 stars because I really enjoyed the story. I got through it in one sitting. I absolutely loved the book, but it's not something I would reach for purposefully. Like as a buddy read, it's fantastic because we get to come in here and we get to have these discussions, and there's just so much to unpack in the stories. I'm waiting for voice messages for Fortress of the Pearl because it's an interesting one.
By the way, was that Pippin, Sarah?
It was. He made a big snore. He's lying on his back, which is never good for a corgi because there's so much neck. So he's just like. Sorry.
Corgi snores all the way from Newfoundland.
It's adorable.
Raph keeps on talking about Sailor and Seas of Fate, and that one is my favorite actually of all of them. So.
All right, so that's book 3 in this bind up. So
yes,
nice.
I'm getting the second bind up in at least 2 months because I have to have it.
Yes. So safe to say we're regrouping for the next book.
Yes.
Yay.
I should be moved by then. So I can stop being wish-washy on scheduling.
Chaos.
Chaos.
Not
Nothing but
wish-washy.
chaos.
Yeah, I'll try to get to book 2 at the end. I think it's probably going to come for me at the end of the month, but maybe I'll be a little more fresh with my thoughts for that discussion. So that'll be a good thing in a way.
It was the first thing I read this month.
Same here. And that's why I'm like, oh man, I need to remind myself what happened. Because oddly, a lot happened in that short amount of pages. Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts?
I like creamy peanut butter more than chunky. But
yes,
that doesn't
I like how Moorcock, I think it's in the dedication, at least in my version, how he says the Broken Sword was a big influence for him. And if you have read the Broken Sword, you can. It's obvious, I think, and if you haven't, I would recommend it. So that's by Paul Anderson.
So we're going to do Liam recommend at the end of this series, like at the end of Elric, there's just going to be a list of things that we now need to read.
I know. Yeah. Yay. And Liam has a fantastic sword and sorcery video, by the way, and a fantastic video on Epic Poo. So
every time you say Epic Poo, my brain goes somewhere completely different.
Because he just changed the
it
diaper.
goes along with the sphincter. So
The pulsing cavern of Epic Poo.
You're welcome. You're welcome for this live stream, everybody who is tuned in.
Yeah. On that note, it's been great having these wonderful people here. I'm pretty sure I remembered to link their channels down below before I started this live. But if I didn't, I will do that afterwards. But you guys should all definitely subscribe to these lovely people if you haven't already. If you're subscribed to me, you're definitely subscribed to them. But just a reminder. Thank you again, everyone. And thank you for joining in chat and providing all your insight. It was great. And on to the next one, Fortress of the Pearl. Well, technically this month or maybe early November. But we'll definitely schedule that and let everybody know when that's going to be. So thank you, everyone. Bye.